Okay, so I want to explore what they call parts work. Parts as in different parts of us internally. Um, like for example, parts we internalize, like a teacher's voice that was critical, or a parent's voice, um, or different attitudes I might have picked up from here or there, or different parts internally that have their own needs. But before we get into it, this area is tricky, more tricky than other areas in the sense that they could be triggering for other people. Um, and also, this is not meant to replace work with the therapist. Of all areas, I want to emphasize this here. Also, what I'm sharing is just personal experiences, and these are particular to me, particular to my history. And one very important area here is that in my case, I don't have any parts that completely take over without the rest of me being aware of it. For example, there's a person who told me that when she's driving, a part takes over and speeds up, and she's not even aware that that has happened till afterwards. Or she goes to the doctor, and he tells her, "Oh, you said so and so last week," and she doesn't remember at all. So now classically in the history of psychology, a while back, this area might have been looked at as multiple personality disorder, and an extreme portrayal of that area is like the Hollywood films where somebody is psychopathic, the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, a part completely takes over and that part is aggressive. Well, two things here. One is that because of all of these portrayals in films, this whole area can look very pathological. It's like, oh my God, no, I don't have that, but in general, the area of psychology has shifted the terminology from multiple personality disorder to dissociative identity disorder. Now, you can look up all of this stuff, and I'll give you a personal example about how my thinking have developed over time, because in my case, I'm a psychologist. I've been introduced to the theories out there. I'm also a human. I'm sharing with you as a client, as a patient, having been in therapy, trying to work on myself. So a few years back, I don't know how long, maybe 6-7 years ago, I got an email from somebody who had seen my TEDx talk on living with depression, and she was quite touched by my talk, and we ended up communicating, and sometimes that happens and sometimes it doesn't. But she started telling me about what I just shared with you, and I took her permission, can I share this? I'm not giving a name here. She shared with me that she has more than 30 parts, and some do take over completely without the knowledge of the rest. And I just went with it, and at the time I was in therapy, and I talked with my therapist about it, and he started refreshing me on how the field of psychology moved from seeing it as a disorder, multiple personality disorder, to more of a continuum. A continuum as in we all have critical parts or other parts, and it doesn't have to be pathological. And when I started talking to her about how she's working with, with her therapist on this, and she was saying, it's mainly trying to get the parts to communicate with each other. Well, this is exactly what I was introduced to with through Gestalt therapy. Fritz Perls, I like Gestalt therapy. And I think I've shared it in one of the other videos. How I did, there was this one-off group therapy session, and I was in the session, and I was having fantasies of being in a very small island, and the sky was red, and I was scared of what's going to come out from beneath the earth. And the therapist at the time encouraged me. It's like, what would happen if you just let whatever is going to come out? And on that occasion, I just went with her suggestion. And the monsters that I felt were there and I was kind of scared of, when they came out, they turned into flowers. And here was an example of, it's an approach in therapy that allowing whatever is underneath the surface to come out and embrace them. Now here's really a very important point to share with you, specifically to my history and my own makeup. I don't have big issues with impulse control, meaning that if I feel aggressive, I don't tend to act out. I can hold it, not perfectly because I'm human. I do lose it sometimes, but not in any dangerous way. So this is a strong word of caution for you, the viewer, in relation to how it's important to work with this with the therapist, the parts work, especially if you have issues with impulse control, whether it's hurting others or hurting yourself. So again, like with all the videos that I'm doing, it's really just me talking about my own experiences, just to give you a flavor of what this work looks like, what it can look like. But it doesn't mean that I am actually recommending you do what I'm doing. This is something you need to figure out with your therapist or with yourself. So these are the two main points I want to say about this. That in general, it's very important, this does not replace therapy, and to be cautious about what this work can bring up. And what really matters at the end of the day is not my experience. What really matters is how things are for you. The reason I'm doing this work is not to push a model on people. I have my own ways of thinking about myself. I have general ways of how I work with myself. But when I work as a psychologist, what matters is where the person is at, what their issues at, what they need to work on. So this is not, whatever I do with myself isn't a general approach that I'm recommending for everybody. It's not like, oh man, all you need is love. No, in some situation, if you have aggressive tendencies and it's like, love that part, yeah, let it do whatever it wants. No, man, so the purpose of the work is actually to show how messy it is, how slow it is, with that, I'll share with you a few examples of what parts work can look like in a more practical way. Actually, I'm having a stomach problem. Can we stop this for a second? Okay, so I don't know what that pain in the stomach was about. Maybe it's about being worried about the effect of this work on the viewer. Um, so in general, the way I look at parts work is looking internally that I have a lot of different parts, and these different parts have different needs. And with time, I grew to see it as a community. And I'm trying to create, hopefully, a peaceful community internally. And sometimes I look at the inner world, it actually feels like a government. There are parts that wants to organize, and have rules and want to dictate to the society. And then you have the artist, which like, fuck the rules. We want to live spontaneously, And then there are parts which like, I don't even feel human, fuck you. Our home is some angelic realm out there, but not this planet, because we don't feel home in this planet. On a good day, which is very rare, things flow, But the purpose of this work for me is to help cultivate internally a sense of community, a sense of society that overall is healthy. And with the insight that there are different needs to different parts. And here's the trick. The trick is not to aim to satisfy each part, but to hear each part. And there's a huge difference between the two. It's like having 10 kids. Each one wants something different, and you're the parent. And you're out in this world with 10 kids, and if one of them is very angry, wants to insult somebody, not to go there. At the same time, stay present to its needs. Well, what is angering you in the first place? Because sometimes the anger itself has a place. There's a certain injustice going on, and you want to speak or you want to act. But for example, during the Civil War, that part had to be particularly controlled, for the lack of a better word. You see some guy with a gun, it's not practical to say, fuck you and fuck your gun. So growing up in this world, there are a lot of internal needs and wants. So back to the point of not trying to resolve each need, but not to dismiss either. For example, and this is the biggest example for me personally, over the years, as much as I've tried to work on being on this planet, I would notice that a part of me still wanted to leave, and I covered that in another video I did on inner child work, and I've covered it somewhere else, I forgot where, but so that part still wanted to leave, and then that part was like, you're forcing us, or you're forcing me to stay here in this world, and I don't like this world. Today I'm living most of my time in Lebanon, and there's got the genocide in Gaza going on, and there's also the threat of being bombed, and whether we should leave and stay and all of that. So that aspect, that this world is not for us, keeps on coming back. and I have to negotiate with that, which is because if I don't pay attention to that, it just keeps on growing, and complications start to happen. So that part in particular, that this world is not ours, we don't feel home here, emerges because of the current living situation that I'm in today, and also because of childhood issues. Whether it is growing up in a civil war, or with my, the huge traumas in relation to both my parents, But the point is, when I give this part space and time and try to hear it, there's a sense of ease afterwards. There's a sense of integration. So that's a curious thing that happens. It's a process, and that's not something, again, I'm cautious about trying. I'm cautious that I'm not preaching this. I'm cautious that I'm not telling each person that they should do this. Some other people might need to deal with it completely differently. But for me, it remains true for me that so far, I take this approach of just listening and being present to every part that emerges. And that works for me. And with the part that doesn't want to stay here, I try to listen to it. And when I listen to it, sometimes it still feels like a part that is separate from the rest. The part of me that loves music and wants to play and play live is part of a community, and it is part of a heritage of music that I just adore, and when I connect with that, I do feel this world is beautiful, at least the music world and how rich it is, but even that has its complications, because it might start identifying with the world of music as the only true thing in life, and the rest is ugly. And I've seen that with musicians too, work on your music and it's like, fuck the rest. But back to what I'm saying about the part that wants to leave. That part in general feels isolated from the rest, and would look at the musician part and the psychologist part, well, like, you guys got your thing going, but I still want to leave. Fuck you. Or, God bless you, good for you that you have your thing, but I want to leave. Sometimes it's angry, sometimes it's bitter, and sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's very tender and soft, and just lonely and in pain. And I'm cautious what to do with it, because if I start sharing this with my wife, or with some friends, but my wife is like, well, am I not good enough for you to keep you in this world? And then I'm struggling to find the right words, no, of course I love you, and I committed to you, and I was like, what, is it a sense of responsibility? And by the way, I'm not being critical of my wife. She's a very beautiful person, and this is where it gets tricky. How much I'm working with this part privately, and how much can I share with it externally, whether it's my wife or friends. There are some friends which like, what? Or like, oh, fuck that, man, But thank God I have a therapist I can work with. So that was one example that this work isn't about resolving issues. In the same way that if you have 10 kids, and if one of the kids wants to act out in a way that becomes disruptive for everybody, including itself, you don't want to feed into that. It's not like, yeah, go beat the shit out of him, he deserves it. No, you wanna hold that back, So that's one example, Another example, by the way, there's a book that I really love, that there's a crossover with this work, although the book itself isn't designed specific. It's Carol S. Pearson, Carol Carol, and then Pearson, Parson, Awakening the Heroes Within. It talks about archetypes and it's related to Jungian work and Joseph Campbell's work as well in mythology. She identifies 12 archetypes like the lover, the destroyer. I really like that book, but it might not work for everybody. So another example of taking a different part, by the way, this work is endless, meaning at a certain point I decided to tackle this area of parts. And it's like, okay, how many parts are in me? And it's like there is the witness, there is the one that's trying to manage all of this, the internal world, there is the spiritual person, there's the musician, there's the psychologist, there's the wife, the husband, the friend to this guy, friend to the other guy. So it's endless. It's how you want to approach this area. So one other example is, sexual impulses. I've always been monogamous, and I've been lucky that I have never strayed outside the relationship, but I have fantasies of having sex with beautiful women, like an urge or an impulse. And I don't see anything pathological about it. It's not a reflection. It can be a reflection of issues in a relationship that I need to work on. But having been through a few relationships, I also found out, it's like, no, I'm actually completely satisfied in this relationship, but I still have these fantasies. And that's okay. Because if I look at evolutionary biology, or just, how I'm wired together, as a person, it's completely natural. It's not necessarily a function of greed or something essentially wrong with me that needs to be addressed. I see it as, well, the more time goes on, the more I see myself as a monkey, who can think and have some sort of awareness, but these are natural impulses that just are wired into me. So the way that I've dealt with it over time is sometimes to have a fantasy of, well, what would satisfy it? What if I lived in this place where I was like a god or an angel, and there were so many women available to me, and I would start exploring, and it was like, oh, they are offering themselves to you? Yeah. Are you sure that's a good thing for them? And in what setting would that work for them as well? You're like a god, like the alpha male, you really want to get into that, so I would play with that, and I would find myself having moral dilemmas even in a fantasy, you know. Now the point of sharing this with you is, again, trying to develop awareness of what's inside, what's internally. Because I've also come across people who have strayed from a relationship and ended up in an affair where, had they thought about it, they were like, man, I don't think that was a good thing to do, you know, because personally, I don't want to stray from a relationship, but the desire is desire. It's eroticism, you know, and it's built into me. And the point is that the more I'm aware of it and the more I explore it, even though there are no resolutions, the more I'm comfortable with it, you know, meaning that with time, I am less likely to act on it. I mean, I feel I'm lucky I haven't acted on it, on these desires. And in general, I move away from any situations. You know, I'm not a drinker. And even when I drink, I don't tend to do crazy shit. But I mean, I'm lucky that way, you know. And I try to not judge people who have ended up in these kind of situations. But the point is to just be aware of desires or impulses. And the more aware I am, the more I engage with them, you know, and engaging with them, like I just shared with you, is not a simple 1, 2, 3, 4. You know, you go towards the world of fantasy, and that's how I deal with it. And there is no resolution, and the desire is still there, but the desire over time has less power. That's the main point about this, you know. I'll give you another one. Another one is the part in me that doesn't feel like I'm a man enough because I am not as aggressive as I'd like to be, and not as assertive. And I'm talking about, you know, having grown up in a civil war, you know, where you feel you want to respond to a situation of injustice. You want to say to somebody carrying a gun, fuck you, let me see who you are without the gun, you bitch, you know. And a few years back, I don't know, about 4 or 5 years ago, you know, I got into Muay Thai, which is like Thai kickboxing, you know, and I wasn't really trying to learn a martial art. I was doing it to, you know, to work on my weight and shit like that, you know. And I ended up with a trainer through a friend, you know. I was like, look, I don't care as long as the trainer has got a good vibe. He says, I know somebody. You know, and this guy has like an amazing smile. I think I've talked about this in some other video. This guy has got like an amazing vibe and is such a great smile. And he's like amateur world champion. He knows his shit, man. This guy is good, you know, but such a great vibe, you know. And he was getting me to train for a while. Eventually he's like, you're ready to spar now, you know, which is like when you wear the shit, you know, and you hit each other. And it's like, oh, I'm getting close to now maybe resolving some of the insecurities I have about myself not being strong enough. You know, all that anger bullshit that I have inside of me, you know. I remember the first time I hit him, I was like, hey, I'm sorry. And he was like, dude, in the ring, I don't know my mother. Hit me. You know, he's great, you know. And so eventually I hit him a few times, and on one occasion I hit him on the nose, and he started like to bleed, you know, and he was still smiling and laughing his ass off. And he was like, good, you know, and I'm looking at the blood, and part of me liked that, you know. And here is where I ended up with the dilemma. It's like, what the fuck am I made of? All this spirituality and love that I identify with, I just enjoy hitting a beautiful person. Okay, so he's telling me he's okay with it. Maybe I should go with it. So I did go with it for a while, but it did stay a dilemma. At one occasion he said to me, look, I think you're ready for a fight. And I think, you've got a very strong punch and a good reach. He says, you have a good chance of winning. And I thought about it and I decided, no, I actually don't want to do that. Because I'm scared that I could hit somebody really badly. My head was like, yeah, but they're choosing this. But at the time being, I don't want to go there. So that's an example of trying to explore aggressive impulses. And the question is, to what extent can I embrace these primal impulses that are in me, whether it's sexuality or aggression? In this case, I did lose weight, I was healthier, but I decided to stop short of going into a real fight, what's going on in Gaza with the genocide, man, that wakes up a whole lot of, primal anger in me, and seeing how all of this is being funded by so many Western countries that put out an image of being noble, that's some fucked up shit, man, and it makes sense for me to have anger, but again, I am the one who's stuck with the anger. What am I gonna do with it? I don't have a easy answer about this. This is the problem with being born a human and not getting your manual for how you're supposed to be in this life. One more? Yeah, one more. So I've shared it in other videos that I've had this spiritual experience at the age of 13, which was completely, I wasn't part of any spiritual training or teaching. I was just praying. I didn't even know what the words meant. And I had this experience where I literally felt my chest open, and I felt this love for the whole world, and I felt a dissolving of the sense of I. That lasted for 2 months, and and then my system shut down. And I've had interest in spiritual disciplines, and I tried to educate myself about spiritual disciplines out there. How do we act in this world? And I tried to even read about that specific experience. What the fuck was that? 13? That's not very common. It's not. And it's not, from the literature that I've read. Is that close to Kundalini, the awakening of energy at the bottom of the spine? Or is it more of a Sufi thing, what they call the opening of the heart? I don't have any clear answers. But, one way that I've dealt with the injustices of the world and some of the shit that I've been through is try to cultivate a sense of more of a heart approach to the world. The world doesn't make fucking sense to me. Creation doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Religions, they don't feel like home to me, even though some religious people, when I see they're acting from a place of genuineness, I can respect that, irrespective of what his or her ideology is, So I've had this it's kind of less now. I've had this identification of try to be loving in this world, and it kind of feels really nice when I'm in that state, you know. But upon reflection and over time, I realized that there is something unhealthy going on. There is the part of me which doesn't want me to be in this world, and the part of me that wants to be loving. And I've explored that. What is it? You're trying to be a good boy. You're trying to avoid conflict. Sometimes you do need to say things. We're like, no, the time that I need to say something, you know, that is confrontational, I'll try to say it in the most loving way. Yeah, but is it too loving? You know, are you letting the person get away with it? You need to be more firm. You know, so there's all of that shit going on. But I noticed on one occasion that if there were 5 people and there is a problem, and I would quite often put myself last or not even include myself. Sometimes, not always, you know. I'm not, you know, it's like I like the Jesus thing, you know. When I started to think about all of this, about that part, I started to notice that somehow I'm tapping into that experience of the 13-year-old that feels connected with everything. And it's like I'm invincible because at that age I felt a certain bliss of connected with everything, and I felt I'm connected with something that is beyond me, that you cannot kill, you know. So that somehow links to the part that doesn't want to be here. And somehow I ended up not being grounded. And somehow I ended up being more giving in a situation where some people will take advantage of that. You know, if I'm with a person who's got the same approach, you know, which is like what is mine is yours, and it's mutual, and there is care, then it could end up a very beautiful experience. Although we're human, so there's complications as well, you know, because at some point, if you're under threat, the primal part wakes up. So I started to notice that on certain occasions, I am not being very grounded. And on certain occasions, I am not considering that this other person will not treat me the same way. And I ended up being taken advantage of. And then I feel betrayed on a deep way. You know, it's like humanity has wronged me, not just that person, you know. So that's another example of trying to identify a trait in me or a tendency in me. Now, on this occasion, this is not a primal thing. The sex and aggression were more primal, perhaps a spiritual thing. But spirituality over time, having reflected on different disciplines, spirituality itself, the question is, when you try to apply it, what do you do? You know, there were times when I would have this fantasy a long time ago. If somebody came to kill me, it was like, well, what choice do I have? Either they're gonna kill me or I'm gonna kill them. And it's like, well, let them kill me. What the fuck? You know, but I did have that for a long time. You know, now is that spirituality, or is that the part of me that was like using spirituality to just get out of here? You know, so the balance between spirituality and the primal, you know, which is really for me to accept, I am born into this body, you know, and this body has a responsibility towards others around me, but towards me as well, you know. So that's parts work where the parts are actually merging with each other and it's not always clear what's going on, you know. That's parts work. That's I can probably talk about it some other time, you know. Think of other stuff I haven't thought, but generally that's the idea. The idea is, you know, move away from the thinking of I am this person, I am this block, Sami is this, you know. When I look in, it's far more complicated than that. The sense of I doesn't even exist sometimes. There are primal impulses, there are things that come from social voices I've heard. There's the spiritual thing, which God knows what the fuck that is, you know, but it's there. You know, this sense of love and beauty that exists sometimes, and then this sense of I wanna fight back, I wanna kill back, and I don't really want to kill, and I don't, you know, I don't want to kill anybody, you know. So look, there is no. This isn't math. This isn't science. This isn't. If you do this, you'll get this. It's really just exploration, and the more I explore, the bigger the world is, and sometimes I can get lost in that world. But in general, the more I try to listen to what's going on, the more I feel integrated. I'm gonna keep it at that. I think that's a good place to leave it. You know, the more I listen and I pay attention to what's going on, the more I feel integrated. Not resolved, but integrated. More integrated, not fully integrated. Okay, that's it.